Okay, Thomas Sowell has claimed that the difference in IQ between races is unimportant because it increases in all of them. It is only that, for example, whites began to increase earlier than blacks. We all get higher results in IQ tests as time goes by. What do you think about that?
Tom Sowell is referring there to the Flynn effect, that, and the argument goes like this, that basically the black mean right now is about where the white mean was in 1940 if you equate these IQ scores over time. And that's a tricky phenomenon, that's a tricky thing to say because it does require you to assume that you're looking at real changes in cognitive functioning. But Tom Sowell, who is both a friend and a person I admire greatly, has said other things about the IQ difference where he's convinced that it is a source of a lot of, its source is a lot of cultural attributes. And to me, I don't think I need to argue with that question. If I were to differ with Tom at all, and I'm not even sure that how much we differ on this, it would go as follows. The gap has not reduced. When they first started to give IQ tests back in the early part of the 20th century, the gap was 1 standard deviation in statistical terms, or 15 IQ points, which means, for those of you who aren't statisticians, which I hope is almost everybody, I say that because I don't think being a statistician is necessarily the right way to spend your life, that if you have somebody who has a 15-point IQ difference and they're 1 standard deviation above the mean, that means that they're the 85th percentile, 84th percentile of all people who take the test compared to the person at the mean, which is the 50th percentile. So it's not a small difference. It's a pretty good sized difference. That hasn't really changed. There was some narrowing in certain kinds of tests during the 1970s and 1980s, and those were mostly academic tests. And that narrowing seemed to be real. There was some narrowing in the SAT. There was some narrowing in some other tests. In the most purely IQ tests, things like the Wechsler and the Stanford-Binet and the rest of them, the most recent renormings of those tests continue to show a 1 standard deviation difference. And you can say that that's because of cultural reasons. You can say it's because of genetic reasons. You can say it's because of a combination of both. We don't know the answer to that question, but where Dick and I guess, would draw our line in the sand and say we think the data are quite clear on this is that the wiggle room for this difference has proved to be small. It's proved to be a very intractable difference that has not responded to a lot of attempts to narrow it. And at the time we wrote the book on the race chapter, when we talked about what had been a narrowing in the 70s and 80s, but we also saw that narrowing seem to have stopped. And so we said, you know, it's a good time to reserve judgment about whether the narrowing will continue or whether it won't, because we just don't know yet. It's now been 7 years since then. If anybody knows of any data which indicates it's continuing to narrow, I'd love to hear about it. I know of some other recent data that have come out which indicates that it's not. So it is an intractable difference. It's not a result of cultural bias in the tests. It's large enough to be, it's not the kind of thing that should be ignored. It's also not the kind of thing which should drive your opinions of people when you see somebody of one race or another. Just as when you see somebody who's an Asian, you shouldn't automatically assume they're smarter than you, even though they may very well be. Because there's enough overlap that it's a very bad predictor for individuals. That's pretty much my reading on where the data stand on the black-white issue right now.